Hello everyone and a very warm welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm just going to offer some very brief concluding thoughts about Iron Bottom and Sunset Sky, the game which I've been demoing the previous video. I've had a lot to say about it that's generally positive, and I stick by that. Good things really do come in very tiny packages. This game could fit in your pocket, and you could take it anywhere you want. You could play it in almost any environment. This is one of the games I play on my commute to and from work, and it is so small you can literally play it on an upturned work bag. And I've said that about other games, but you can just about squish this one onto it. And the duration of the game is such that you can usually complete it within your travelling time. Or if you don't, it generally, you get to a fairly advanced point in the game's narrative, so you have an enjoyable experience. The only problem is the dice. I tend to use the random number generator on my phone to get around the problem of lost dice and annoying my fellow passengers on the train. But that's by the by. So what do I like about the game? I think the speed of play is a major winner. There is just enough chrome to really please a Second World War fan, and particularly with my bias of interest towards the Pacific theatre. I like that you get subtle differences. Let me just dig out a couple of examples. I mean, I suppose the really obvious one is when you compare the Zero and the Wildcat. The Zero has somewhat better offensive ratings. Its range is better. However, the Wildcat does have a rather better ground attack factor. I mean, fans of both aircraft might debate some of these points because in game terms, and there's a weakness here, there's nothing to differentiate the relative toughness of the Wildcat over the Zero. Both are knocked out by a single hit. So that's one thing the game doesn't do well. There's certain levels of granularity where you don't see the kind of detail that you want. But there is enough historicity there. I like that you get specific named ships like USS Wasp over there. The Japanese even have an outside chance, and this is every Japanese player's dream when they get to the Guadalcanal campaign. You have a chance to see if you can influence things by wheeling out Yamato. Who doesn't want to do that? And then there's the bases as well. I like how the bases are modelled. I like how the cards are well adapted to dealing with bases, not only providing the operational support. It's not all about the ships at sea and the carriers. They're very important, but the other crucial element in this game is control of the bases and the airfields they represent. And I love how the rules carefully blend in a system that allows you to work out, well, let's take the example of a landing assault. So there would be an air attack phase, there would be a naval combat phase, and then lastly there'd be an amphibious invasion phase where all of these ratings are used to fight off the various threats or succumb to them, depending on how things go. So it's a really nicely created package that blends together, and then you have the friction of war provided by the event cards. Both sides have different event cards, so you get things that really feel like they are suitable for each side. So that card is a sympathetic detonation. It allows you to roll the dice and add extra damage to a Japanese target if you score a hit on it during bombing attacks, say, or perhaps even during naval combat. And that's quite true to life. US damage control on the whole was superior to Japanese, and I think that's more than a little nod to the catastrophe at Midway, but there were similar, if much lower key catastrophes during the Solomons campaign. The Japanese, for their part, if I can find the particular card, there we are. that card grants them major night combat bonuses, and the picture actually is of one of the US cruisers getting horribly done over at the Battle of Savo Island, which was, of course, the signature Japanese surface victory in that campaign. So it's nice little bits of chrome like that that give each side their unique feel. All of that said, there are a couple of things that the game does less than well. I've touched on the fact that Wildcats seem to get a bit of a bum deal in the game. And there are other things. Combat in general is very be all or end all. So, as you've seen from my video demonstrating the gameplay, the reroll mechanism, which is a standard in all forms of combat in this game, means that individual units, if they roll well, can dish out a phenomenal amount of damage. Really, really quite devastating. And they can sometimes prove unstoppable. You know, a dive bomber squadron that keeps rolling well could melt into. You could have a big battleship just disappear in front of it. And while that could potentially happen, the Guadalcanal campaign wasn't really noted for that kind of devastation. Yes, lots of ships got sunk. Yes, lots of ships got damaged, but you didn't see individual squadrons performing these Rambo-esque episodes of mass destruction. It was more concerted efforts. So that's another thing that maybe the game doesn't model quite so well. I'm in two minds about it. I understand why the designer did that, because it allows you to resolve combat fast. The destruction of a card doesn't necessarily mean a ship is sunk. It might mean that it's so badly damaged that it's been forced to put back into port, or that a base is so severely wrecked that it's effectively taken out of the campaign. That's very much what happened to the Japanese base at Munda historically. So you could argue all these points. But for a system that's reasonably involved, I find land combat is probably the most abstract of the three dimensions. So transport ships, the much cherished and highly prized invasion transports, regardless of whether you win or lose in this game, they vanish from play. In the game, as the rules are written, if there's no protracted fighting on land, um, if you have not succeeded in seizing the objective by the end of your turn, it's assumed your troops are defeated and that simply vanishes. Now, I can see how, again, that's a good mechanism for fast gameplay, but it means that this game doesn't really model the months-long slog that was the Battle of Guadalcanal. Now, interestingly enough, while I was trying to figure this game out, I'm familiar with a couple of the other games that Tomoki Kondo has worked on. And reverse engineering a couple of those, I grafted rules onto this game, which turned out to have been wrong when I finally got my hands on his rules, which he very kindly supplied to me. Um, and I'd made assumptions which while I'd been playing under those assumptions, had made this game far longer than he'd ever intended. But I'd inadvertently stumbled on a system which did not do so much damage, did realistic amounts of damage. So ships were not necessarily sunk so often, they were more frequently damaged and forced to return to port. I'd mistakenly thought that a roll of 6 would wipe out an air squadron, but a roll of 5 would merely damage it, and that you put it face down by your home base, and during your repair phase, if you generated any repair points, you'd have a choice of using them either on your ships or on your aircraft, or even on your bases. I'd also thought, I hadn't twigged from my first attempts to decipher the game that bases are automatically repaired every turn. That was another thing that seemed a bit counterintuitive to me, because of course the US, with their fantastic logistical backup, were able to repair damaged bases far more efficiently than the Japanese. And you don't see that in this game. Both sides repair their damage as efficiently as the other. Lastly, there's the ever present problem of fuel, which was not an issue for the US but was for the Japanese. In this game, as written, Japanese fleets can put to sea in their entirety without any let or hindrance, whereas in reality, they were only able to do that twice or at best three times to have the capacity in the historic campaign. Most of the other times, their operations were severely hampered by a lack of fuel, but there's nothing in this game to stop the Japanese fleet being at sea continuously. You see, the US Navy would have been able to pull that off, but not so much the Imperial Navy. And I wonder if players wanted a more realistic experience. Maybe there's some way of building that in. I've experimented with a couple of optional rules and I think they work, but they're at best optional. But despite all these niggling little things, at its heart, Iron Bottom and Sunset Sky is a really, really good game. It's probably one of the quickest playing Guadalcanal games I own. It is visually very attractive. I love the aircraft cards. I really do. These are a work of art. They're beautifully done. The aircraft are superbly drawn. The information is very attractively presented. And it's true of everything, whether it's the bases or may as well linger on the lovely, lovely Yamato, the ships. There is a lot in this game for people to like. And it's also an extremely good gateway game because it's a simple game to teach. The rules are really not that long. And I would see this as a game that strikes that happy balance between being a gateway for those who started simple war games but would like to progress to something meatier. This is a good interim. And for your grognard, your detail loving grognard, who perhaps doesn't have the time to play War in the Pacific, this is a lovely little game that would scratch anybody's Pacific itch, I feel. Depending on what mood I'm in, I either play with Tomoki Kondo's own rules or the mistaken rules that I came up with while I was trying to figure the game out in the first place. Um, I flatter myself that I've made parts of the game feel a bit more historical by reducing the destructiveness of individual units, and also in restricting certain Japanese options in terms of deployment because of the fuel situation. But to be perfectly honest, I would really hesitate to call the ones I came up with an improvement on Tomoki Kondo's idea. Far more accurate to call them an alternative. And I will always, always love the game as he designed it. It is very, very sad that this game is so hard to find now. I really do wish that a Western publisher would pick this up. People would buy. Everyone I've shown this game to has been wowed by it. They can't get enough of it. And I've played it with several friends, including a couple who are not that interested in the Pacific War, but they love it. And it's such a wonderful little thing. And there's something quite nice, really, about these dinky little cards. Um, so there's a lot to love. It's a real shame that this game has become such a rarity, such a difficult thing to find. But I hope that that changes. If you are fortunate enough to get your hands on a copy or be in the general vicinity of someone who has one, it's one of those games where I'd say, please do play it. Please do give it a try. Um, I'm reasonably confident that you will enjoy playing it. You'll find it challenging. The one thing I really love when you're playing with a human opponent is the hidden mechanism. There is so much tension, particularly early in the game where your scouting has not really got underway. And you look at your enemy's side of the board and you just see this mass of concealed unit cards. And there's lots of scope for trickery. I mean, if you wanted to fool someone, you don't have to deploy planes on an aircraft carrier. You can just have it out there and they might think it's a surface ship. risky tactic, but sometimes it's worthwhile depending on what your long-term strategy is. Because of course, I mean, hidden units all very well, but if you see an aeroplane card tucked underneath a ship card, they're both face down. You're going to know that's an aircraft carrier because the rules don't permit you to get up to acts of dirty fakery by sticking an inappropriate aircraft card on a capital ship. That said, if your capital ship, let's say, let's find something. Ah, yes, two of my favorite Japanese cruisers, Tonei and Chikuma. Look at that seaplane capacity. One plane looks very much like another when it's face down. You could stick two of those on Tonei and Chikuma and convince an unsuspecting US player that that's an aircraft carrier. Now, Tonei and Chikuma would probably pay the ultimate price if they were subsequently attacked, but if you've managed to misdirect an enemy airstrike while accurately placing one of your own, your quid's in. And that is one area where this game really, really shines, among many areas where it shines. So I am going to leave it there. I will probably come back if opportunity ever presents and do a full playthrough. And I might even, if you wish, if you're curious about them, demonstrate my rules, the erroneous way I've discovered of playing this game, which still works.